All right, today we're going to dive into a perspective that really challenges how a lot of us might approach faith. It kicks off with a pretty tough question. What if our desire for comfort is actually missing us a huge part of the story? This explainer gets into the idea of divine judgment, not as a scare tactic, but as what the source material calls a central, unavoidable truth. So right out of the gate, the source asks this: is our faith getting a little too comfortable? And that's a provocative thought, right? The argument it makes is that in our rush for all things positive, we might be, subconsciously filtering out the more difficult, more sobering parts of belief. And it really tries to dig into why we do that. What is it about those challenging parts that makes us want to turn away? And that brings us to what the source says is the real heart of the issue. This idea of a customizable gospel. It's this modern tendency we have to kind of build a faith that fits our own tastes, where we basically pick and choose the parts that feel good, and, well, we just leave the rest on the shelf. And that leads to this really fascinating concept the source calls the customizable Jesus. The idea here is that we end up creating a version of Jesus that's tailored perfectly to our own preferences. We, of course, embrace all the things we love, the forgiveness, but we might just conveniently sidestep the parts that really challenge us, the tough doctrines like divine wrath or a final judgment. And this slide just lays out that contrast perfectly. On one side, you've got all the parts of the gospel that we're naturally drawn to, right? Unconditional love, endless blessings, forgiveness, and mercy. But then on the other side, you've got the concepts that, let's be honest, often get left out of the conversation: divine wrath, sobering judgment, and the reality of hell. The source's whole point is that you can't have one side without the other if you want the complete picture. So this is where things get really serious. We're moving into the core of the source's argument, what it calls a sobering but absolutely necessary reality: the certainty of judgment. This is the part that directly challenges that comfortable narrative we were just talking about. So the crucial point the source makes is this: judgment isn't presented in Scripture as just, a possibility or some kind of vague metaphor. No, it's framed as an absolute certainty, an inevitable event that has to be taken seriously. And to back this up, to really ground this argument, the source points directly to Scripture. This quote from the book of Matthew, which actually comes at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, is used as a really stark, direct example. These specific words, "I never knew you, depart from me," are highlighted to show a final, incredibly consequential separation that's based on where someone truly stands. Okay, so what is this final judgment, according to the source? Well, it gets broken down into a few key ideas. First, it's a reality for everyone. There are no exceptions. Second, the outcome is all about a person's standing with Christ. And to really underscore the finality of it all, the source points to passages like Revelation 20, which describes this ultimate, irreversible separation. Okay, so after laying all of that out, which is pretty sobering, you're probably wondering, is that it? Is that the whole story? But no, it's not. The source is actually very clear that right alongside the serious warning of judgment, it also describes what it calls a way out. And here's the path forward that it proposes. It's pretty straightforward. Step 1, just acknowledge that judgment is a reality instead of trying to ignore it. Step 2, understand the role of Jesus as the solution, as the way out of that judgment. And finally, step 3, accept the complete gospel, both the comforting parts and the really challenging parts, not just the version we've customized for ourselves. All right, this all builds up to our final section. And honestly, it has a pretty surprising conclusion. Because if all of this is true from this particular perspective, what does that actually mean for us today? What's the modern-day application of such a difficult truth? So this leads to the big practical question, right? If you accept this whole framework, how is this sobering truth supposed to actually change what we do? There has to be a real-world implication. So what is it? Well, the source argues that it all boils down to one primary action. It claims that there is one single thing that stands out above all others as the most loving thing an ambassador of Christ can do. And it's probably not what you're thinking. And there it is. The most loving act, according to this viewpoint, is to offer a loving warning about the reality of hell. And yeah, that's the big, surprising takeaway. The source completely reframes what might seem like a harsh or even judgmental thing to do, and instead presents it as an act of profound love and care, something driven by a desire to help someone avoid a danger you believe is very, very real. And this final quote really just pulls the whole argument together. To withhold a warning of impending danger is not love. True love speaks the whole truth even when it's uncomfortable. The logic here is that genuine love isn't really about making people feel good in the short term, it's about their long-term well-being, even if the truth is a difficult thing to hear. So we'll leave you with this question to chew on, based on everything we've looked at from our source today. When is telling an uncomfortable truth the greatest act of love? It's a really challenging thought, and it gets right to the heart of what it means to truly care for each other.